Welcome to Creative Communities. My name is Daniel, here to introduce the video you're about to see. A huge thank you to Boo, who gave an amazing talk, Fanfiction and the Art of Web Novels, on day 4 of Series 1 of Creative Communities. Thank you so much to them for delivering an amazing talk. And thank you also to the AHRC's NWCDTP for helping to support this series of events. Without further ado, enjoy.
Discourses around fanfiction of Western media and online Western cultures are already being conducted and documented very well elsewhere, so this talk is going to be more about what fanfiction of Asian media and online fan cultures in Asia look like. This includes non-Anglophone fandoms and cultures, as well as fans of Asian pop cultures who use English as their primary medium. In this lecture, we'll be looking at different forms of fanfiction and web novels and webcomics, and how they interact with each other as well as with their parent and canon cultures, by looking at how Asian cultures receive and engage with fanfiction and independently produced online content. I hope that together today, tonight, we will be able to expand our horizon and undo some of our biases in regards to what we think of as real literature. A note on terms usage, I use the term the West to mean the US and the UK, and when I say Asia, I mean East and Southeast Asia. Of course, the Middle East is also part of the Asian continent, but I've never been to the Middle East and I have not consumed enough Western Asian media to be making the assumption that what I'm talking about also applies to my brothers, sisters, and friends from the Middle East. Right, so this is a Western definition of fanfiction and is what most of us would think of when we think of fanfiction. Now I will add to this definition so that it also describes what fanfiction looks like in Asia. So fanfiction is a work of fiction written or drawn that borrows characters, settings, or other intellectual properties from a pre-existing work of fiction, such as novel, film, TV series, anime, manga, music, and video games. And it's also a work of fiction written or drawn that uses celebrated real-life figures as characters. These public figures are usually celebrities, singers, actors, K-pop idols. Fanfiction in this sense, I would say, is a way for a fandom of a given celebrity or band to celebrate together. It's also often a benchmark of success for many celebrities. For example, there is a famous K-pop band that's licensed a game and a webcomic to be made about them, turning themselves into fictional characters in a very, very dark and real way. In the webcomic, their fictional selves are normal non-celebrity people dealing with abuse, parental neglect, suicide, depression, and time travel. Yes, I'm talking about BTS's official webcomic, Save Me, on Naver Webtoon. So from this example alone, I would already argue that fan cultures in Asia and their relationship to their canon cultures already look very different from how mainstream cultures in the West may engage with fan fiction and online fiction. You know, in terms of respectability politics, censorship and sanitization of industry, gatekeeping, and draconian enforcement of copyright law, all of which we'll hopefully have time to get into. Also right now, I want everyone to pick 3 to 5 characters from any existing work of fiction, video game, TV shows, books, or films. And then just write it down on a piece of paper, right? And they can be your favorite characters or just characters that you know well, or celebrities that you're a fan of, or famous historical or literary figures. If you're a writer or a webcomic artist, please feel free to, why does it keep changing by itself? Please feel free to include a character from your original work. Write their names down on a piece of paper, and they can be any characters like Elsa from Frozen, or I don't know, Count Dracula, or Virginia Woolf as well. You don't have to think too hard, but by the time you complete the first quarter of this talk, I want you to have already written down 3 to 5 names. Right, so here's a brief look at how traditional publishing industry in the West works for those who are not familiar, or for those who are, aspiring writers and may be interested in getting published, right? So conglomerates are, why does it keep changing by itself? Conglomerates are traditional publishers and publishing companies that own subsidiaries and imprints. They're the gatekeepers of literary production in the West. Traditional publishing is a process of publication by way of traditional publishers as above. So for writers, if they want to be taken seriously in the West, they look to get traditionally published as opposed to self-published, because traditional publishers are what people in the West think of as producers of quote unquote real books and real literature. And gatekeepers are these powerful entities that decide which works of fiction deserve to get published and which books and whose stories deserve to be celebrated as part of a culture. In pre-publication, these gatekeepers would be literary agents and publishers and everything that makes a publisher, like acquisition editor, editorial director, design and marketing teams, developmental editor, and so on. In Anglophone publishing, a manuscript has to be approved by all of these gatekeepers and goes through many iterations and a vetting process before it gets into the hands of us readers. So in post-publication, the gatekeepers would be educators, librarians, scholars, reviewers, and readers. These people have the power to decide which books deserve exposure, whose stories deserve to be taught, celebrated, and passed on to the next generation. And through exclusion, whose stories don't deserve to be celebrated as part of a culture. These powerful people get to decide that. Right. So the difference between online publishing and self-publishing. Self-published books are books in various formats that don't rely on traditional gatekeepers and conglomerates for publication. Indie authors would be another term that some people use to talk about authors who self-publish their works. And on the Asian side of the internet, online fiction and web fiction are fictions that are published and produced online, primarily or in the first instance for online audience. Right, so for us to unlearn like the biases we've internalized from what we were taught in schools, and because of what we weren't taught in schools, we need to be able to see clearly what these biases look like. So in the West, literary biases against fan fiction and online fiction like culture may look like this. In January, the bookish side of Twitter blew up, as it so often does, because of bookish drama. This time it was because of fanfiction. A particularly problematic writer gave their hot take on fanfiction that did not go down well at all with readers and other authors, including me. So this 13-tweet thread manages to embody every imaginable prejudice against fanfiction and online fiction. So here are the first 3 tweets. We are not going to go through like the whole thread because we don't have time for elitist toxicity. And I also don't like feeling angry. So the thread claims that 1, fanfiction is a form that actively teaches you to write, whereas 2, published authors who started out with fanfiction are fucking terrible. 3, fanfiction is low effort, formulaic, lowest common denominator writing. The thread goes on for 10 tweets more, like accusing fanfics of erasing meaningful queer literature, calling queer fanfics recycled Disney IP, and insulting queer readers for consuming queer fanfics, disregarding completely the facts that traditionally published literature, aka real books, are only occasionally queer, and that queer literature is inaccessible in some countries. So as one Twitter user wrote in a parody thread, if anything, the sanitization and respectability politics of mainstream publishing has served to exclude meaningful queer literature. Queer kids should not learn what it means to be queer by what Disney allows in the last 10 seconds of Star Wars. Don't revere or honor that. And in response to the claim that fanfiction is lowest common denominator writing, they wrote, mainstream, sanitized, corporately approved, strictly to be morally marketable writing is bad, actually. And what they mean by this is what I mentioned earlier about the heavy vetting process a manuscript goes through before it can get into the hands of readers. Right. It's a generally known fact among scholars of East Asian cultures and media that the Anglophone industry, such as, for example, the US comic industry, is said to have been sanitized to death, largely due to the comic code that was adopted in 1954, which banned the field's quote unquote contribution to the debauched innocence of the young, which sounds like it might be like, it should be a good thing, right? To protect children from inappropriate material. So that's what it says on the label, but what the code actually intended to do and what it successfully did, and as some scholars have argued, has shaped the industry into what it is today, was ban people from being gay in comics. So yes, mainstream, sanitized, corporately approved, strictly to be morally marketable writing is not a good thing in this case, right? So in contrast to the not real art bias, that's going on in the West, you may be surprised to find that in Japan, most fan fiction is drawn, not written. This is called doujinshi. Original doujinshi are works that are not based off any existing manga, game, anime, or anything else. A doujinshi artist creates a story, writes it, draws it, self-publishes it, or posts it online, like on pixif.net, which is the Japanese equivalent of DeviantArt. And parody doujinshi are fanfics. The doujinshi culture, however, I would say is not exportable. It would not work in the West because of draconian enforcement of copyright law. As Mary Kennett notes, the proliferation of doujinshi owes a lot to the rather relaxed ideas of copyright in Japan. In the States, fan projects are shot out of the sky all the time and are threatened with extreme penalties if they continue to publish. This means you cannot sell your low-key fanfics, and you can't make your own Harry Potter online game or a Star Wars fan magazine. But in Japan, it's a completely different scenario. Because of komike, there's an entire industry built around doujin creations. According to Frederick Scott, the overwhelming size of the doujinshi market has caused the border between it and the commercial market to blur. There are an estimated 1,000 fanfic selling conventions per year in Japan. The largest of these conventions is komike, which attracts over 600,000 fans per year, and publishers, instead of calling the police and lawyers on doujinshi artists at these conventions, they go and set up stalls to scout for new talent. And why I think this is like so great is that in Japan, manga and anime are considered both popular and critical mediums. There are the literary and the mainstream. In other cultures, scholars might allude to scriptures, novels, or folklore to illustrate a point. In Japan, it's manga and anime that are referred to by all segments of the population. So because the boundary between high art and low art is so blurred, people are less quick to make moral judgments and less quick to discredit a value of a given work, be they like fan fiction and self-produced works. They're less likely to hierarchize and discriminate, and this is because the culture of respect in Japan. Many professional artists respect amateur artists having come from similar circumstances. Like they see fan fiction as the first steps towards professionalism. For example, Clamp, one of today's most revered manga studios, got their start making biao doujinshi for komike. And mainstream publishers understand that doujinshi artists represent their most hardcore fans, and prosecuting them is just counterproductive. You put your fans in prison, who's going to buy your work? Moreover, because relationships are important, Japanese companies and individuals are less likely to sue. In the case of doujinshi, the amateur artists may become literary rock stars in the near future, and it doesn't make sense to ruin a relationship with the next Clamp. And potential business dealings aside, filing lawsuits against, say, a high schooler who's an aspiring manga artist is just seen as bullying and an unreasonable waste of time. So by ignoring copyright violations, Japanese publishers and gatekeepers have created an industry and a culture production in which fan obsession and new talent can be grown and harvested. In conclusion, doujinshi may violate copyright laws, but it isn't theft, at least not in spirit. Fan artists are celebrating the characters and stories they love through creation and sharing. In America, according to Tofugu, in America, grumpy rights holding companies shut down the party by calling the cops. In Japan, companies let the music play because they realize that the party is in their honor. I just wanted to include that quote because it sounds really nice. So how can we apply this to the Western, to the Western culture production if it's not exportable? As Neil Gaiman said in his commencement speech at the University of the Arts 9 years ago, we are in a transitional world and the nature of distribution is changing. The rules, the assumptions, and now we're supposed to use of how you get your work seen and what you do then are breaking down. You can be as creative as you need to be to get your work seen. The old rules are crumbling and nobody knows what the new rules are. So make up your own rules. So it's been 9 years since Neil Gaiman gave this speech, and we're still kind of stuck in an age where people discriminate against web fiction. So, I think for this to work in the West, we need to learn to embrace the changes that come along instead of keeping a culture landlocked in an outmoded model of distribution that no longer reflects the conditions and technology of our time. The notion that real books are strictly those that are traditionally published by conglomerates is restrictive, elitist, and actually quite divisive to the culture that perpetuates it. And we've looked at an example of that. So, the traditional model of distribution in the West and the literary biases that we harbor are biases that serve to keep conglomerate publishers and traditional gatekeepers in power. They control the distribution channels still. And as we've learned by looking at Japan, and as we will learn by looking at South Korea, the not real art bias as we know it in the West is an exclusively Western thing. So the way we consume information and engage with each other have changed, and I think we should start by learning to embrace that, innovate, don't discriminate, right? In light of this, I think it's important to understand how stories can affect the way we see the world and treat people around us, and how even the slightest awareness of the writing craft can help us better understand ourselves as well as others. So now both the workshoppers and the viewers, pick up anything you can use to write with, like a pen or a pencil, and then pick up anything you can use to write on, preferably paper. And you have 2 minutes to write down as many words as you can. It doesn't have to be anything to do with what I just said, just as many words as you can. Scribble down every word that pops into your head. And it also doesn't have to be in English. Write it in your best language. The point is to not think too hard. And Daniel will be, I will count down from 3 and then you do the timing, 2 minutes, okay? Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, time. Now, what if I told you that that piece of paper you just scribbled on is a map to your soul? Don't look at it and don't change anything on it right now. Please fold that paper up neatly and keep it on your desk. And because you'll be needing it again later, but for now, don't look at it. Don't change anything on it. I hope you didn't draw like a dick on it. Anglophone fan fiction. To avoid demographic confusion, demographic or geographic confusion, I use the term Anglophone fan fiction to refer to fan fiction written in English as opposed to English fan fiction. Anglophone fan fiction can be written by writers living in any country and who are part of any fandom. This includes fans of Western media, but also K-pop, anime, manga. And the point is that the language of the texture production is English. Right. So I want everyone to take a look at this passage and think about whether or not, when read it, this passage conforms to what you may think of as fan fiction, and why or why not, and also what's its intertextual reference here, like what is the passage talking about and what literary works or real people the author may be referring to. There are 2 names you can see in this passage that may serve as clues, right? The passage goes, the milk is in the back corner of the store, past aisles of unappetizing prepackaged junk saturated in sodium and who knows what other chemicals. Disgusting, he thinks, that people are actually tricked into buying that sort of thing. He does not think about the specific parameters of Kira's new world often. His nebulous vision is just that, to be fleshed out once the foundations are laid. The internalization of the new morality is only the beginning. Of course, Moore was an idiot reactionary, concepts ludicrous and half-formed. There is no point in creating such a questionable fictitious society. One must be prepared to support it as one or the other, a genuine model or parody. Otherwise, there are too many gaps in the reasoning and it becomes an exercise in futility. Faith must be absolute and unwavering to inspire others to believe. Right. So Daniel told me at the beginning of the talk that because of like the recording function, I can't ask people questions, but I wanted to ask questions about what you guys thought, but I can't because technology.
You can, if you want. I can easily edit stuff out if people aren't happy with being in the recording.
I can ask them questions. Is that okay? And then, right. So, what do you think about this passage, and what do you think the text might be referring to, like intertextually? Raise your hand. I'm gonna start picking on people, like my former lecturers. Becky, unmute Becky. How do you? Yeah.
So it's Thomas More's Utopia in the second paragraph. And then obviously possibly some kind of self-reflective, I'm writing a fictitious society, so why am I different to what Thomas More is? But the first question, I don't know, because for me, I would only be able to identify something as fan fiction if I could identify some characters that existed somewhere else. And Kira, I have no idea who that is, so I don't know.
Thank you. The More is, yes, it's Thomas More. Amaranth is a Death Note fan fiction written by Settlers in 2007. It's a 400-word one-shot / drabble, depending on how loosely you define drabble, wherein Light Yagami, the megalomaniac in this illustration, goes to the supermarket to pick up milk for his mother. That's it. That's the entire fanfic, and it's great. When I first read it, I was like 16 or 17, and I didn't know like anything back then. And I found this fanfiction online, and I read it, and I went like, "There's no character called More in Death Note, and what's a reactionary?" And I don't think I even knew what the word parody meant. I had to look everything up. It turns out that this idiot reactionary that Light is shitting on is Thomas More, from the guy who wrote Utopia. Utopia is a work of socio-political satire written in Latin and published in 1516. The book depicts a fictional island society called Utopia and its religious, social, and political customs. Amarat is the capital city of Utopia, and Utopia literally means nowhere in Greek. And I found out all of this when I was like a kid because of this 400-word Death Note fanfiction. I wanted to know exactly why Light thought More was an idiot reactionary and why his concepts are considered ludicrous and half-formed. And I was like, I'm gonna judge it for myself. So like some Southeast Asian kid from like a developing country whose English is a second language ended up reading a British socio-political satire originally written in Latin because of a Death Note fanfiction. I think the internet is an amazing place. Another reason I think this is great is because it does a godly job at humanizing Light. It doesn't make him like likable, it just makes him comprehensible and recognizable as one of our species. It's just a great character study. A travel exercise, yay! So right now for 5 minutes, I want everyone to write their own travel. So here's the instruction, like choose a title or topic from the list I provided to the left, and then choose a character from your list of characters that I've asked you to make, and choose a prompt. This is optional, and for people who may want some help getting started. So for 5 minutes, you'll be writing as that character, the character that you've chosen. So for example, I choose Eren from Attack on Titan as my character, and my title or topic is 60 seconds. And my prompt, you don't have to choose a prompt if you don't want to. I'll choose a prompt. My prompt will be Dear Diary today. So for 5 minutes, I'll be writing a diary entry as Eren from Attack on Titan. It doesn't have to be good, it just have to be written. Okay, I'm going to count down from 3, and I know you do the timing thing in 5 minutes. 3, 2, 1, go. One time. Right. Does anyone want to share? Oh, Emily, yay. Hi.
Hi, this is terrible, just FYI. Feel free to laugh.
It's okay. It doesn't have to be good. It just have to be written. I'm sure it's great. So which character did you pick? And which title did you pick?
I picked the title Not Easy, and I chose a character I've created from one of my own stories and book series that I'm writing.
Oh, that's great.
And I went with the second get starter, okay, this is going to surprise exactly no one.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is going to surprise exactly no one, but Hunter really is the guy we saw at the factory. My heart sank. For a brief moment, I hoped desperately that it wasn't true. Typical of fate to come and punch me in the gut and kick me while I'm on the floor. And there's more. Of course, Daniel has more to say. Little chatterbox never shuts up. He's got her, Adria. He's got your sister. The wall behind Daniel's head shimmers as it crumbles beneath my fist. I hadn't even registered I'd moved or was crying, but Daniel's hand on my arm and cheek proved different. We'll get her back, I promise. I clutched Daniel's side. I'm going to kill him. There you go.
Oh, that's so great. Great. So do you, you said you write your own series? What's your story about?
So this one was a fantasy series where basically she was the main character had forgotten all her memories and was an immortal warrior, basically like daughter of like Hades, sort of. So she could like control the darkness kind of and things like that and life and death, but she didn't know that. And she had to save her twin, which was like Pandora from Pandora's box,
Wow.
to save like the world from collapsing in on itself. Yeah.
Whoa, that sounds so interesting. You have like a link to your work or anything like that, please like drop it in the chat. I think a lot of people will be interested in like getting to know your characters and reading your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are now treading very carefully into the territory of Korean pop culture. At first I wasn't planning on mentioning K-pop at all, but as I was preparing for this lecture, it occurred to me that if we're going to talk about South Korean pop culture, we'd be doing it a disservice if we don't talk about K-pop, especially now that it's become more of a global phenomenon and it's challenging a lot of dehumanizing racial stereotypes and caricatures that the West have of Asians, that we're all nerds, effeminate, or inherently stupid because we speak non-Anglophone languages, or we're submissive, meek, or just aggressive sexual robots whose only purpose in life appears to be servicing white men. Not my words, I took this from an article. So even if you look at K-pop as a prism through which we come to get a sense of how Asian narratives and what fiction work as a whole, we cannot not mention it. So once upon a time, specifically that time was the year 2009, online platforms that were the staples of fan art and fan fiction were LiveJournal and DeviantArt. To put in context how long ago 2009 was, Instagram did not exist, Tumblr was only just gaining popularity as a new micro-blogging platform, and Twitter had been around for only 3 years and was quite shit because you couldn't quote tweets or retweet, and the servers crashed often because they couldn't handle the amount of users on their website, which sounds ridiculous now, but that was how long ago 2009 was. And also YouTube did not have closed captions, so this was a little before I got a job as a lyrical translator. And in terms of the staple webcomic platforms in the West, Tapas and Webtoon, Tapas didn't exist yet. It would come to exist in 2012, and then Naver Webtoon existed at the time, but it was only available in Korean and would stay that way for half a decade more. In 2009 and onwards, Asian fans and fans of Asian media who write in English were driven off Anglophone platforms such as fanfiction.net and were told by fans of Western media to go post their Asian fanfics somewhere else, the cyber version of Go Back to Your Country. Not only that, but Asian fanfics that were posted on fanfiction.net were actually getting deleted without any explanation by the website. So because we did not have like a platform of our own, Nishiren, otherwise known in the real world as Jason Ado, created AsianFanfics.com as a favor to a good friend who was frustrated because another website kept deleting her stories. While AFF was easier to use, some people still preferred LiveJournal because of literary snobbery, essentially. I was one of those literary snobs. At the time, it was believed that the fanfictions posted in LJ communities were a lot more well-written, but fanfics that were popular on LJ weren't necessarily popular on AFF because AFF was considered the K-pop equivalent of Wattpad. And actually, a quick note for anyone who reads or draws webcomics or is familiar with Naver Webtoon, Wattpad actually has very recently been acquired by the Korean company Naver Webtoon. So this most likely means that Naver Webtoon is planning to build an online platform in the West for web novels, which is great because even though the Western industry has perhaps been slow to adapt and embrace new ways in which we consume stories, the changes and the undoing of outmoded bias can still happen from outside help. So AFF was the place you would go to read or post self-insert romance with your favorite K-pop idols, whereas LJ was the place you would go to have your heart broken and to torture or kill your favorite K-pop idols. Because most K-pop fanfics were often inspired by music video storylines and the mood of the songs that were being promoted at the time. Whoops, I forgot that. So unfortunately, the mood, not exactly fluff material for a self-insert romance with your K-pop idols. So, every culture has different norms of acceptability in the arts. As a writer who was raised in a non-Anglophone country, like discerning an appropriate level of darkness has been an ongoing challenge for me personally. So going forward, I want everyone, like especially the workshoppers, to take note of how these startlingly dark narratives, startlingly dark, not that dark for me, but yes, do deal with like alternate timelines, dystopia, otherworldly elements, and questions concerning reality, memory, and most importantly, suffering. And as we go on to talk about webcomics and the isekai genre later, these ideas and themes will reappear because they are a commonality of Asian narratives. So the list of words that I had you choose your drabble title from are actually K-pop song titles. And so not only did I make you write a drabble, you also unknowingly wrote a songfic. I'm not sure about now, but back then compared to Western music videos, K-pop music videos are very storytelling heavy, and they are often only very loosely thematically tied to the lyrics and the music. So in your reading pack, I've translated the lyrics of a few of these songs for your convenience. So a song called Cleansing Cream by a group called Brown Eyed Girls was released in 2011. Whoa, that was 10 years ago. You wouldn't intuitively think a song called Cleansing Cream would depict like human suffering or life struggles in any real or raw or perhaps even mature way, but it does, and it does it really well. Let me know if you can hear the sound. So here's a bit of the MV so you have an idea how the song sounds. Could you hear? Yes, just. So that's how like the song sounds, and it was kind of a hit back in 2011 was because it was so surprising. Like this song title and the lyrics and then the MV, they all tell different stories. For example, so the lyrics is about not being able to get over your ex, and it links cleansing cream, the erasing of makeup, to the erasing of memories and the erasing of feelings. But the MV storyline is about a visually impaired child getting abused by her carer, and there are many existing critical theories about why this is the case, but we're not going to get into it because we don't have time. So here's another song that sounds like it should be a happy song, Paradise. But the lyrics literally goes, with health breath, I watch over you, that's all I can do. I'm scared you fall apart. Crooked, twisted, because my heart has gone awry. I can't send you off like this, what am I to do? Trembling, desperate, even though you're dangerously close to breaking. I can't help but tie you down, what am I to do? You need to be here for it to be paradise. Paradise has trapped you against your will. A sad paradise that can't be reached while we're awake. A paradise where we can be together forever. And the MV at face value portrays a parallel realm paranormal story where your K-pop idols are all dead and are ghosts haunting a house and imprisoning this girl to the house, and the girl can't see them, but they watch over her. And here's how the song sounds. I want to show it to you just a little bit because it's very surprising. Like the stage performance to this song itself is very dance heavy, but then the sound of the song is like a ballad with like rock influence and a techno synth. Just gonna play the ending. 조금만 날 더 잡아둘게 더 바라볼게 더 심장이 식을 때까지 Right, so that's how the song sounds, and yeah. So K-pop is, I think, very contradictory and surprising because everything you expect it to be, it's not, and it always defies expectation and flips like the script. I don't think we have time for this one. I wanted to like do something with Kim Sung-gyu's 60 Seconds, where we close watch like the MV and try to figure out how many alternate timelines there are as a way to discuss narratives, Asian narratives' treatment of time. But ironically enough, we don't have time for Songkyu. Sorry, Songkyu. So in Asian narratives, especially in K-pop, high concept ideas like time travel and parallel universes and otherworldly things aren't treated as shiny fantasy objects to be discovered, conquered, and or explained away. The unexplainable and otherworldly things are woven seamlessly and silently into the fabric of reality, another prism through which we engage with, recognize, and experience our humanness. Does that make sense? Like the supernatural and the unexplainable serve to amplify our shared humanity, often through suffering, the consequence of the choices we make and the futile struggles in life, like struggles with love, with passing time, with the act of letting go. We can't escape from these things because they are part and parcel of living. And just imagine the film Inception's ending with the spinning top and viewers like trying to figure out if is the real world or is it a dream. That kind of like mind-bending, what the effery, like silently woven into every other narrative you consume during your formative years. At some point you come to a realization that it doesn't matter if this or that timeline or reality is real or not. The fact that it hurts us and the fact that we feel it makes it real. So the moral of the story of these narratives may be that because we are human, we all suffer. And to the extent that we suffer, we are human, which sounds so morbid when I say it in English. Right. So because K-pop music is opulent with these alternate universe storylines, with K-pop idols acting as fictional characters through and going through like fictional torment, it's easy for fans to write their K-pop idols as stand-ins for original characters. Does that make sense? Or like, in some fiction, in some fan fiction, like writers create their own universes and people them with K-pop idols. For example, I Have Always Confused Desire with Apocalypse by Ko Moon-young is like a Brave New World style, like futuristic dystopia, alternate universe with a caste system, and where people aren't allowed to form human connection or make their own choices, lest they be quote unquote disappeared. And this is a story actually that taught me to use parentheses creatively and effectively to speak to readers and to tell another story as an undercurrent of the main story. Also, another one I want to point out is When You Smile, Your World Disappears by Liz Yu. This is interesting because the title is taken from a variety show called Weekly Idol, where the hosts were measuring the size of one of the members' eyes because Songkyu, the person that we did not have time for, Songkyu has very small eyes, and the host teased him and say, "Oh, when you smile, your world disappears." And yes, a fic writer took that line and turned it into a dystopian sci-fi alternate universe story, wherein the government administers a mandatory drug to all the citizens. This drug acts in a similar way to dissociative anesthesia, ripping humans of all their abilities to feel. Because without emotions, the fic writer argues people would behave rationally and there would be no fights, no hatred, but this also meant that there was no happiness. Yeah, so all of this was inspired by the line, "When you smile, your world disappears." I think, K-pop fic writers have the ability to turn anything happy into something very, very dark, because that's what the canon has taught us to do. So on the other side of the spectrum, we have the self-insert romance fics that are popular on Asian fanfics. And this is really cool because so this webcomic, which was published by Tapas Media, one of the biggest international web fiction publishers, was originally a fan fiction on Asian fanfics. It was a 35,000 word EXO fanfiction written by Chrismatics back in 2013. And I actually remember seeing it featured on Asian fanfics, but I wasn't part of the EXO fandom and I wasn't into romance. But in 2016, Ivy Song signed with Tapas Media, and his barcode tattoo was officially published and marketed as an original web novel. Then in 2017, it was officially adapted into a webcomic series. So what was a self-insert romance fantasy AU fanfiction that I used to be too much of a literary snob to appreciate became one of the biggest Anglophone romance web fictions to date. And Ivy's song is probably really rich now. So the moral of the story, don't discriminate, participate, or you miss out on these really cool phenomena, right? Constellation of images. So when you were asked earlier to write down as many words as you can think of, that was in reference to the constellation of images. So the poet Stanley Kunitz claimed that the source of a writer's originality stemmed from their own personal constellation of images. And he used this exercise that I asked you to do. And this is like constellation of images this is the idea that there are certain recurring themes throughout your life that define the way you see the world, which in turn dictates the way you write. So paying attention to recurring motives in the way you think as much as the way you write can help you discover the source of your originality. So for Kunitz, his personal constellation revolved around the central star, which was the death of his father, who committed suicide 6 weeks before his birth. So this loss surrounding his death was described by Kunitz as a nexus, linking every metaphor and image throughout his works, and so supplied the metaphor informing everything he's written. So in this slide, take a look at the words that you've written down and see if you can find any recurring themes, and maybe, in your own time, circle any repetitive images, descriptions, or isolated words, and see if you can discover your own constellation of images, right? It's the same with characters. They too have their own constellations of images. And as writers, it's up to us to understand and discover that. So on page 13 of the reading pack, we're going to look at 3 of these short passages, and I'm going to give you some prompts and instructions that you can try out to figure out the constellation of images of the characters, whether they be your original character or an existing character, right? So I'm just gonna read out the passage. So it goes, consequence of a history rewritten was non-existent if it was impossible to tell when it had been done. Stories to Kurokiri were like mist, ever-changing, but somehow fundamentally the same. Mist held memory the same way it held its shape. That was not at all, really. So here, Kurokiri, he's a villain character from Boku no Hero Academia, a shonen superhero manga. And his name comprises the kanji for black and mist. And he has the ability to create black mist that can teleport people to different places. And this fanfic is written from his point of view. So, in this passage, the writer uses mist as a metaphor for memory. In this, what am I saying? This technique helps keep a character you're writing about in character. So the next one is Kuro Shitsuji fanfiction, and the character is called Seal, and he sold his soul and made a deal with a demon. The manga is set in London during the Regency era. I think it was during Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth? I think it was Queen Victoria. And he solves crime as the Queen's watchdog, and his sidekick being his demon butler. For Seal, the perimeters of intimacy have always been drawn this way. Bold and dark, harsh lines that dig grooves to border the parchment contract of his life. Dignity is the greatest lie, the futile struggle against the injustice of living. The illusion of innate integrity in the face of it all. With Sebastian at his side, he watches the reunion of Mokta with the doctor's wife, the way their thin arms wrap around each other, the pellucidity of their tears. People give up pieces of themselves in stages, first the name, then the body, then the final secret, the last revelation, the one that is no longer Seal's to give. So in this fanfiction, Seal thinks about love in terms of giving up parts of the self and drawing up contracts, making deals and settling debts. And also note that he doesn't use the word love or the word soul at all. He calls love intimacy, and soul isn't even part of his vocabulary, even though that's what he's talking about in the last line. Seal sold his soul and it isn't his anymore, so he doesn't use that word. So the metaphors here in this fanfiction are very in line with Seal's constellation of images. And I think that's very, very clever. So the third one is Ryuk. And Ryuk is a Shinigami. He's a death god in Death Note. And as a supernatural being, he wouldn't necessarily look at things the way humans do. Light says he cannot sleep at night, but Ryuk could tell him otherwise. Light sleeps long enough to dream, his fingers scrabble at the mattress, and his eyeballs hiccup beneath their lids. And if Ryuk could only sink into Light's head, at these times, he thinks he might see moving pictures like those on the box on the desk where the small flat people struggle and fucking flicker forever. And the title of this fanfiction actually is, I think, taken from a line in Hamlet, like we fed ourselves for maggots. So in this passage, because Luke is not human, the writer defamiliarizes mundane human act like sleeping and everyday objects like the telly by using words that don't necessarily, my English is gone, associate with those things. Like eyeballs hiccuping, that imagery is very vivid and very alienating. You wouldn't necessarily associate hiccuping with the movement of the eyeballs, and and I think like these things, it helps us get into Rook's head really well. So these are the kind of fan fictions that taught me to write. I guess my argument here is that it invalidates the problematic Twitter thread that we discussed earlier, that fan fiction teaches you to write words. I don't think so, and I hope that going through a bit of these, you also don't think so as well. We probably won't have time to do this exercise, but I just want to give, like, if you're a writer practicing how to like characterize or humanize your characters like in your own time, right? So what you would do in order to write like, sorry, my English is gone now. To write like this is first, like, you pick a character, like any character can be your original character. So step 2 would be pick an object that's symbolic of your character. Like when you think of that character, you think of this thing. For example, Count Dracula, perhaps you think of blood, garlic. Elsa, you think ice, right? And snow. Spider-Man, spiders, spider webs. And then I, would write the object next to the character's name. And then step 3 would be to choose one abstract topic or a theme for the exercise, like time, love, memory, and think about it, how your character would feel or how they view the topic you've picked. If you pick like passage of time, does your character view time in terms of growing up, aging, or immortality? Would they view it in a positive or negative light? And if you pick like love, who's dear to your character, who's the most important or closest person to your character? Or if your character literally like has no one who loves them, like Loki, think about love in terms of the absence of love. What does that look like? And if you pick like memory, like feel that that's too vague, think about memory in terms of forgetting, remembering, or being the only one who remembers, which would suck, right? Or maybe it wouldn't, depending on the character. For like 5 minutes or like however long you want, write that character and then have them describe the chosen abstract topic in terms of the symbolic object. That basically just means that if I were to pick like Count Dracula and the symbolic object being blood and the topic being time, how is time like blood? I would write about how Count Dracula might feel about time or immortality, using blood as a metaphor. This is an exercise that I often do to get like to know my own characters, and because it doesn't have to be fan fiction, right? But in fanfic terms, this is what we'd call a character study. And ultimately, fan fiction is, I think for me, like fan fiction is all about the character, about getting to know the human beyond the canon. I don't read fan fiction to learn about the sci-fi or the fantasy lore. I read and write fan fiction to get to know the characters who I like and want to understand. Perhaps, they perhaps don't get enough screen time in the canon. Ooh, finally, we're here. INSO stands for Internet Sosor, which means internet fiction or web novels. And in South Korea, self-produced online fictions have gained mainstream popularity, which has led to establishment of many publishers and companies whose primary purpose is to provide legitimate and monetized online platforms for web novelists and artists to publish and serialize their works. INSO has been so mainstreamized that the film and TV industries have been adapting many self-produced online fictions for TV. If you watch Korean dramas, especially the more recent ones, they were most likely adapted from webcomics and web novels. The more recent ones being Sweet Home, Itaewon Class, True Beauty, which are all available on Netflix. So the word isekai originated in Japan, meaning different world or other world. Traditionally, isekai is a genre of light novels, web novels, manga, anime, and video games that revolve around a character from Earth being transported to an alternate universe, a parallel fantasy, or a virtual world. Despite the word having Japanese roots, the genre is not exclusive to Japan. Isekai is widely known in Asia as the reincarnation genre and is popular in many countries such as South Korea, China, and Thailand. And on the English-speaking side of the internet, we simply use the term isekai to refer to a genre of web fiction wherein a character reincarnates or transmigrate into a different world. There's a distinction here. Reincarnation means to be reborn again, like from day one as a baby, right? But transmigration, however, is when your soul simply inhabits someone else's body, a body that's already been born and had its own like soul before you transmigrated into it. Or it can simply mean that you, along with your body and your soul, is transported to another world, usually in an alternate fantasy world inside a web novel. And it's usually, for some reason, it's usually like during the Regency era with like the dukedoms and like the counts and the viscounts. I think like isekai webtoon taught me a lot about like the Regency era. So now I know like all about like dukedoms and stuff, right? Or they can get like transmigrated into like a video game or like an automate game. An automate game is a dating game, but it sounds like a dating game, but you can die in it. There are games where like there's like terrorist attack and bombs and you die. Anyways, what am I saying anymore? Oh, so there's also something that exists in between, which is time travel, wherein after a character's tragic death, time reverses and they will wake up in the past and has a chance to fix it. And just a related fanfiction term, fix, correcting, thing where you correct or rewrite the original story, such as to redeem a villain, to bring character back from the dead, or to respond like to things that you find problematic in the canon. And metafic is from metafiction and basically means the same thing, right? So if you're familiar with isekai webtoons, you know that they come with a hilariously high degree of self-awareness and metafictionality. The most creative and clever thing I think about isekai is its self-awareness. Like the artists or novelists make observations about certain fiction tropes and then simultaneously reinvent them, and also like poke fun at them in a sometimes funny and sometimes dark way. Don't let the trailers or like the premises or the summaries fool you into thinking they are what they are, just like with K-pop, because they always flip the script. So for example, I'll let you watch this webcomic trailer, which is like just 1 minute. So you have an idea of how like tongue-in-cheek it is and how it's marketed as one thing, but yeah. Right, so that was the trailer, and right, so in the webcomic Inso's Law, or the Law of Internet Novel, Hamdani is an ordinary student who finds herself transmigrated into a high school romance web novel as the best friend of the female lead, the perfect Ban Yardong. And at school, Dani meets the 4 heavenly kings, who I'm going to refer to as F4 because 4 heavenly kings sounds a bit cringy. So in school romance narratives, therefore, are typically the most popular or handsome boys in school. They're also stereotypically incredibly talented or extraordinary in some way, rich or sons of conglomerates, or have some kind of dark, tragic backstory. Dani can tell right away who are the, like in the narrative, she goes to school, she can tell right away that she's in a web novel and who are the F4s, because they all have ridiculous eye and hair colors that don't conform to the strict school dress code, but somehow nobody bats an eye. So according to like web novel tropes, any ordinary female side character who are friends with these perfect male-female leads are bullied and treated badly by other students due to jealousy and then some. And so Dani's main goal is to steer clear of Ban and the F4, but the main plot keeps unfolding around her, and the main characters refuse to leave her alone, which at first is hilarious, but the narrative very quickly like sobers up. So ultimately, like Insular's Law is a story that explores the human condition beneath these character tropes and the ontological anxieties and social pressures any ordinary person would feel when surrounded by impossibly perfect like characters with perfect grades and perfect looks, and having your parents and your peers constantly compare you to them and berate you for falling short of impossible non-human standards that's literally only achievable in fiction. Moreover, Dani suffers from anxiety and the growing sense of otherness, and she doubts her own self-worth and sometimes her existence. Dani has, so not really like the romance that you probably thought it was. Dani has a difficult time opening up to her perfect friends, even though they truly care about her, because she can't possibly tell them that, you know, the problem is that they're just fictional characters in a book. She also doubts that, you know, they genuinely value her as a friend, to the point that she becomes upset and goes into like hard denial mode when one of the male leads confesses his romantic feelings to her. And she believes that he doesn't value their friendship and that's why he's messing with her. Moreover, she also suffers from feelings of helplessness and doubts that anything she does or say has any real power, because in this world, she quite literally is a, you know, a side character in someone else's story. So that's like, you know, the undercurrent of a story that disguises itself as a meta romance school life comedy, right? So yeah, we're almost done. So in Trash of the Count's Family, so this is about like the isekai, like fantasy tropes. So in Trash of the Count's Family, the character Kim Doksu transmigrates into the novel that he was reading before he died. And the summary goes, when I opened my eyes, I was inside the novel, Birth of a Hero. I've become Kale Henitius, the trash character of the Count's family, the family that oversaw the treachery that the hero of the novel, Han, visits. The problem is that this stupid trash who I've become messes with Han, only to get beat up to a pulp. I'd like to live quietly as trash in this new cushy life, so for now, let's not get beat up. Right, so fantasy isekai is basically just anti-heroism on steroids. Like a character from our world gets transmigrated into a novel, usually an antagonist character as an antagonist character, villain, or like some insignificant side character that doesn't even get screen time in the canon. And their goal is to live like a cushy, drama-free life. Yeah, they always have that same goal, is to like stay away from the main plot and from all the heroics and the dangers. Which is, I think, also that I noticed is quite different from like, you know, Western like popular narrative where you're the chosen one and like you have to save the world. These like kind of isekai Asian narratives are about like, let's just stay on the margin and not upset the main plot. Right, where am I? Right, so yeah, so they try to stay away from like the heroes and the dangers, but very quickly they realize that in order to live out this dream of a cushy like drama-free life, they will have to actually like engage with like the main plot points, often to prevent them from happening. For example, in Trash of the Count's Family, Kim Doksu, who is now in the body of the trash Kale, ends up having to save an enslaved dragon so that it doesn't break free and set fire to a nearby village, so that the hero protagonist, like Han, doesn't end up becoming more psychologically twisted and beat him up. But in so doing, this fearsome dragon ends up becoming Kale's follower, and because Kale helped the hero protagonist also starts becoming his follower, and which is why he said, at this rate, I'll have a zoo in my hands. And so yes, the transmigrated character ends up like smack dab center of like the main storyline, often the main storyline that they're trying to avoid, which is where like the dramatic irony comes in, because the transmigrated character is still in denial and believes that they can escape the main storyline at any time, but we readers know that it's a rabbit hole from here onwards. Right, we're almost done. So these isekai stories are all like just fun and games. The reason they've become so popular, I've only like picked 2, but I really wanted to talk like about all like the 50 isekai stories that I've read, but yeah, we can't do that. So the reason they've become like so popular is that underneath the bells and whistles and you know, underneath the meta-comedy and absurd premises, these narratives in the end focus on the human. Like they present to us from an unfamiliar direction, life struggles with, struggles with morality, with self-worth, with social expectations, and the questions concerning what we're put on this planet or the other planet to do. And these things resonate with us because they are also our struggles. So in conclusion, Asian narratives, including the K-pop narratives that we looked at, and these withhold making moral judgments, which is why they're often open-ended, ambiguous, and episodic. It never ends because you just keep on getting reincarnated, right? So there's no hero. Often there's no hero, no villain, and there are no heroics. There are complicated people living their complicated lives on some days just trying to survive. The point of the isekai is to subvert the notion, that boundary between good and evil. What am I saying? To subvert the notion that the boundary between good and evil is fixed. Which is why there are so many isekai stories about characters waking up in the body of the villain, such as death is the only ending for the villainess reverses the hourglass, everything was a mistake, I became the villain's mother, the villainess is a marionette. These are all fanfiction titles, by the way. I'm not a villain's mother. So either that or, waking up in the body of side characters, which speaks to people, because these side character focused stories reassure us that, anyone can be the main story eventually, and that, we are the main characters of our own lives. The end, yay. So in conclusion of the whole thing, we looked at fanfiction, web novels, and webcomics, and how they interact with each other as well as with their parents and canon cultures. As we've seen with the doujinshi culture in Japan and the incel culture in South Korea, as well as, fanfictions on the Asian side of the internet, cultures that treat the boundary between high art and low art more as a threshold instead of a wall are enjoying a richer and much more productive cultural consumption and production because they allow for more movement to and from within the fields of entertainment, literature, and the arts. In these cultures, online fictions aren't subcultural phenomena that the mainstream and the literary thumb their noses at. Rather, they are embraced and celebrated by their mainstream cultures and their gatekeepers. So by looking at, how Asian cultures engage with fanfictions and independently produce online contents, I hope that we were able to re-examine some of our biases in regards to what we may think of as real literature.